Las Vegas, 1964. A city where fortunes disappeared faster than ice in the desert sun. A city run by men in silk suits who settled disputes with more than lawyers. Men who answered to names like Bugsy, Meyer, and Sam. Men who feared nothing. Except one guy. A math professor. Soft-spoken, polite. The kind of guy you'd trust to watch your kids. But to the mob bosses who controlled Vegas, he was the most dangerous man alive. They spiked his drinks, twice. They tampered with his car to cause an accident on the highway back to LA. They sent men in cheap cologne to deliver messages that didn't need to be spoken out loud. His name was Edward Thorp, and he didn't need a gun. He had something far more terrifying to the men who built Vegas on other people's bad luck. A formula. In 1964, for the first time in the history of Las Vegas, the casinos changed the rules of blackjack. Not because of cheaters, not because of new regulations, because of him. He was banned from nearly every casino on the Strip, even when he wore disguises. False beards, wraparound sunglasses, different walks, different voices. They always found him. His book sold over 700,000 copies and became a New York Times bestseller. It caused panic, scathing denials, emergency meetings in back rooms where the air was thick with cigar smoke and paranoia. Every time you see a casino dealing from 6 or 8 decks, every time they shuffle before you reach the end, every security camera tracking your face, you can thank Ed Thorp for that. But here's what they don't tell you in the Hollywood version of this story. For every genius who beat the system, there were thousands who tried and lost everything. Homes, marriages, sanity. Ed Thorp proved the house could be beaten. But in doing so, did he create something darker? This is the story of the man who mathematically destroyed casinos, and the price everyone else paid for it. Chicago, 1932. The Great Depression. While Wall Street bankers were jumping out of windows, Edward Oakley Thorp entered the world in a cramped house where 10 relatives lived under one roof because there was nowhere else to go. His parents had nothing, but they had something more valuable than money. They had curiosity, and they passed it on to their son like a genetic mutation. When the family relocated to Southern California, young Ed discovered something that would shape his entire life: the power of figuring things out. At 12 years old, while other kids were playing stickball, Ed became one of the youngest amateur radio operators in the country. He wasn't just following instructions from a manual. He was reverse engineering how the world worked. Summer of 1942, World War II was raging. His father came home with 2 gifts: a box of minerals and advanced chemistry books that most adults couldn't understand. Ed devoured them. Then he did something that showed the kind of mind he had. He walked into a local pharmacy and convinced the owner to sell him chemicals at cost so he could run his own experiments. At 13 years old, he was already thinking like someone who would later negotiate with Las Vegas pit bosses. He started entering competitions: physics, chemistry, winning scholarships. Not because his family could afford tutors or prep courses, because he was obsessed with understanding systems. He won so many competitions that he met President Harry Truman, a kid from a Depression-era household shaking hands with the most powerful man in the world. But here's the thing about Ed Thorp that would later terrify casinos. He went to one of the worst-ranked high schools in California. The odds were stacked against him. The system said he shouldn't succeed. So what did he do? He gamed the system. He figured out that if he ranked first in the state physics exam, he'd get a full scholarship to UC Berkeley. So he taught himself what he needed to know. And he won. He lasted 1 year at Berkeley before transferring to UCLA. Not because he was failing, because he'd found something more important than prestige. Her name was Vivian. They met during his first year, got married in January 1956, while Ed was still pursuing his physics degree. She would later tell him that dealing with gamblers and casino owners who could cheat him and even use violence wasn't worth the risk. She had no idea how right she was. By 1958, Ed had his PhD in mathematics, not physics, math, because he'd realized something crucial. Math was the language of probability, of odds, of systems, and systems could be beaten. Late 1950s, Ed and Vivian take a trip to Las Vegas for Christmas vacation. It was supposed to be a fun getaway, but while everyone else was drinking and losing money and having a good time, Ed noticed something about blackjack that didn't match what everyone believed about the game. A pattern, a flaw, a crack in the foundation of an entire industry. And once Ed Thorp noticed something, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 1959. Ed Thorp had just accepted a position as a professor. Most academics would be focused on publishing papers, getting tenure, building a respectable career. But Ed couldn't stop thinking about that blackjack table. He later said, "You could make a lot of rapid connections with people, ideas, equipment, and resources. I remember thinking, these people are like me." By day, he taught mathematics to MIT students. By night, he broke into the MIT Computation Center. Not literally. He had access, but what he was doing there had nothing to do with his official research. He was teaching himself Fortran programming, using one of the most advanced computers in the world, the IBM 704, to calculate something no one had ever calculated before: the exact probability of winning at blackjack. See, everyone assumed blackjack was like roulette. Every hand was independent, random. The casino always had an edge. But Ed saw what others missed. In blackjack, the cards that have been played don't go back in the deck, which means the composition of the remaining deck changes, and that changes the odds. If you could track which cards had been played, you could know when the deck favored you instead of the house. He built his system on something called the Kelly criterion from a 1956 paper on information theory. It told you exactly how much to bet based on your advantage. Big bets when the deck was in your favor, tiny bets when it wasn't. The math was beautiful, elegant, undeniable. On paper, you could beat the casino. But Ed needed to publish this, get it peer-reviewed, make it real. He started researching who could help him publish in a prestigious journal, and he found a name: Claude Shannon, the man who invented information theory, the father of the digital age, a living legend at MIT. Ed expected maybe a brief conversation, a referral to someone else. Instead, what was supposed to be a quick meeting turned into a lunch that lasted hours. Shannon didn't just understand what Ed had discovered. He was electrified by it. Shannon sponsored Ed's paper for publication in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. But that wasn't all. At that same lunch, Ed mentioned another idea he'd been working on: a way to beat roulette using physics and timing. Shannon's eyes lit up. What happened next sounds like science fiction. Claude Shannon and Ed Thorp built the world's first wearable computer. The device was strapped around your waist under your clothes. It looked like a box filled with wires. One person would watch the roulette wheel and tap a hidden switch in their shoe with their toe, inputting the speed and position. The computer would calculate where the ball would land. The other person would wear a hidden earpiece and receive musical tones telling them where to place their bets. Weekends in Vegas. Ed and Claude Shannon and Claude's wife Betty, testing a device that wouldn't become legal to ban until 1985, because in 1960, no one had ever imagined someone would bring a computer into a casino. The device worked, but barely. Wires would short out. The connection would fail. It was temperamental, but it proved something crucial. The casino could be beaten with science, but the roulette computer was too unreliable, too dangerous. Ed went back to his first love, Blackjack. He refined his system, practiced, memorized, calculated his edge down to the decimal point. The math said he would win. Now he just needed money to prove it, and someone willing to risk that money in a world where asking the wrong questions could get you buried in the desert. Ed found his backer, a professional gambler and former bookmaker named Manny Kimmel. $10,000. In 1960, that was enough to buy a house. Ed Thorp was about to walk into the lion's den, armed with nothing but a formula and the absolute certainty that he was right. Reno, Nevada, then Lake Tahoe. Ed Thorp decided to test his system away from the bright lights of Las Vegas, somewhere quieter, less scrutiny. First weekend with Manny Kimmel's $10,000, they won $11,000 in 2 days. The system worked. The math was right. Ed Thorp had cracked the code. But winning money in a casino isn't like winning a math competition. There's no trophy, no handshake, no congratulations. There's just attention. The kind of attention you don't want. First night in Las Vegas, Ed moved from casino to casino, playing his system, winning steadily, methodically. And one by one, they kicked him out. Not for cheating. He wasn't marking cards, wasn't using devices. He was just counting, thinking, remembering. But to the casinos, that was worse than cheating, because he was using his brain, and they couldn't confiscate that. At first, Ed thought this was just part of the game. Get kicked out, move to the next casino. No big deal. He had no idea what was coming. See, Ed started treating Vegas like his personal ATM. Need money for a new car? Fly to Vegas for the weekend. Need cash for a home repair? Back to the tables. The casinos noticed, and they didn't just think he was lucky. They knew something else was happening. At first, they thought he was cheating, hiding cards, signaling to accomplices. But when they couldn't find any evidence, they became terrified. Because if this math professor could beat them, what was stopping everyone else? That's when things got dark. Ed was sitting at a blackjack table, winning, focused. A waitress brought him a drink. He took a sip. Within minutes, his judgment was off. His count was slipping. He couldn't think straight. They'd spiked his drink. It happened again at the same casino. Different night, different drink, same result. Ed realized these people weren't playing by rules. There were no rules. Then his car started acting strange. The accelerator stuck. The brakes felt soft. He barely made it back to LA without an accident. Someone had tampered with it. Vivian, his wife, had warned him, "You're dealing with gamblers and casino owners who could cheat you and even use violence." He hadn't listened. He thought the math would protect him. But math doesn't stop a poisoned drink. Math doesn't fix tampered brakes. Weird stuff kept happening. Coffee that knocked him out cold. Threatening looks from men in expensive suits. Messages delivered through casino employees that were crystal clear without being spoken. Leave. Or else. But Ed Thorp wasn't just stubborn. He was a problem solver. If they knew his face, he'd change his face. Wraparound glasses, false beards, weird shirts and hats, contact lenses, different walks, different voices. He looked ridiculous, but it worked. For a while. until it didn't. No matter the disguise, they'd eventually spot him. His betting patterns, his focus, the way he played gave him away. Casino surveillance was getting better, smarter, more paranoid. And Ed Thorp was the reason why. Then came 1962. Ed published Beat the Dealer. He expected it to be a niche academic book. Maybe a few thousand mathematicians and gambling enthusiasts would read it. He was supposed to give a talk at an American Mathematical Society conference. He expected a small crowd of academics. Instead, gamblers, journalists, hustlers, regular people desperate for an edge. The room was packed. The media swarmed. The book became a New York Times bestseller. Over 700,000 copies sold, and the casino world erupted in panic. Scathing articles appeared in gambling magazines denying that card counting was possible. Casino executives went on record calling Thorp a fraud. They said the math was wrong, that he was lying. But they knew he wasn't. And in 1964, they did something unprecedented in casino history. They changed the rules of blackjack. For decades, the game had been played the same way. But now, because of one math professor, they altered the fundamental structure. More decks, different splitting rules, earlier reshuffles. But here's the thing about casinos. They forgot who their real customers were. Regular players, the ones who lost money happily, hated the new rules. They complained. They stopped playing. So the casinos reverted most of the changes, but they kept some. And they added new tactics, dealing from 6, 7, 8 deck shoes, shuffling long before reaching the end, training dealers to spot counters, installing better surveillance systems, facial recognition technology before it even had a name, databases of banned players, shared information between casinos. You can thank Ed Thorp for every shuffle machine you see today, every camera watching your every move, every pit boss trained to spot advantage players. But here's the part that haunts this story. The dark side nobody talks about. For every Ed Thorp who beat the system, there were 10,000 people who read Beat the Dealer and thought they could do the same. They couldn't. Ed had a PhD in mathematics, access to the most advanced computer in the world, the discipline to practice for hundreds of hours, the emotional control to stick to the system even when losing. Most people had none of that. They had hope, and a book, and dreams of easy money. So they went to Vegas, Atlantic City, Reno. They tried to count. They made mistakes. They bet too much when they shouldn't. They panicked when variance hit. And they lost everything. Marriages destroyed, savings accounts emptied, houses foreclosed. Because Ed Thorp's book gave them something more dangerous than a losing system. It gave them the illusion of control, the belief that they could beat the house if they just tried hard enough. And for problem gamblers, for people susceptible to addiction, that illusion was gasoline on a fire. Ed Thorp never intended that. He was just publishing his research, sharing his discovery. But intentions don't matter when the consequences pile up. How many people lost their rent money because they thought they were the next Ed Thorp? How many families fell apart because Dad spent every weekend in a casino with a dog-eared copy of Beat the Dealer, thinking this time would be different? The casinos knew. They saw the flood of amateur card counters, kicked them out, banned them, sometimes worse. People were harassed, threatened. Some were beaten in back alleys by casino security that looked the other way. Ed Thorp had proven the house could be beaten, but in doing so, he'd painted a target on the back of everyone who tried. By the late 1960s, Ed Thorp was tired. Tired of the disguises, tired of watching his back, tired of the threats and the spiked drinks and the constant paranoia. He'd proven his point. He'd beaten the casinos, made money, published groundbreaking research. But Vegas wasn't fun anymore. It was work, dangerous work. So Ed Thorp looked around for a new challenge, and he found it: Wall Street. He started calling it the world's biggest casino, and he wasn't wrong. In 1967, Ed published Beat the Market, a scientific stock market system. The same probability theory that beat Blackjack could beat the stock market. Options pricing, arbitrage opportunities, statistical edges. It was all just math. In 1969, Ed founded Princeton Newport Partners, a hedge fund before hedge funds were cool. His approach was revolutionary: quantitative analysis, computer models, mathematical edges exploited over thousands of trades. Over 19 years, the fund achieved a 19.1% annualized return. In the late 1990s, Ed's personal portfolio averaged 20% annualized returns over 28 and a half years. Ed Thorp went from banned blackjack player to Wall Street legend. But the pattern repeated itself. Just like Beat the Dealer inspired thousands of amateur card counters, Ed's work in finance inspired a boom in quantitative trading. Card counting techniques led directly to advances in securities market technology. The boom of professional blackjack players and teams created demand for better analytical tools. And those tools, they migrated to Wall Street. The MIT blackjack team that came after Thorp, some of those guys ended up running hedge funds. Ed Thorp had created a pipeline from casino advantage play to financial advantage play. But here's where it gets interesting. While Ed used math to help people, to generate returns for investors, others saw his work differently. In 1991, Ed Thorp met Bernie Madoff. Well, not exactly met, but he analyzed Madoff's returns, his strategy, his numbers, and immediately, Ed's mathematician brain started screaming. The returns were too consistent, too perfect, too impossible. Ed became one of the earliest skeptics of Bernie Madoff's supposedly stellar investment performance. He couldn't prove it, but the math didn't add up. 17 years later, in 2008, the world discovered Ed was right. Bernie Madoff had been running the largest Ponzi scheme in history. $65 billion, thousands of victims, life savings evaporated, retirements destroyed, suicides. Ed Thorp had used mathematics to create wealth. Bernie Madoff used lies disguised as mathematics to destroy lives. Two sides of the same coin. Today, Ed Thorp is in his 90s. His net worth is estimated somewhere between $800 million and $1 billion. He still does chin-ups and push-ups, still sharp, still thinking. One analyst said he's one of the few people in any industry whose initial insights altered the trajectory of revenue of an entire industry so drastically. Ed Thorp didn't just beat casinos. He changed them forever. But the question remains, was that change for the better? Walk into any casino today. Look around. 8 deck shoes, continuous shuffle machines, cameras everywhere, facial recognition, algorithms analyzing your betting patterns in real time, low-denomination games designed to keep you playing longer, 6-to-5 blackjack payouts instead of 3-to-2, 000 roulette wheels. Modern casinos have shifted to what industry insiders call a turn-and-burn philosophy. Get as much money from tourists as quickly as possible. Don't worry about advantage players because the games are virtually unbeatable now. That's Ed Thorp's legacy. He proved the house could be beaten, so the house made sure it could never be beaten again. Not without extraordinary effort. Not without risks most people aren't willing to take. Card counting still works in theory, but in practice, multiple decks, frequent shuffling, sophisticated detection systems, bans, blacklists shared between every major casino. It's nearly impossible. Ed once said, "In the abstract, life is a mixture of chance and choice. Chance can be thought of as the cards you are dealt in life. Choice is how you play them." He was dealt a brilliant mind, Depression-era poverty, curiosity that wouldn't quit, and he played those cards perfectly. From a cramped house with 10 relatives to MIT professor to Wall Street legend, he beat the casinos. He beat the market. He spotted Madoff before anyone else. Ed Thorp won. But what about everyone else? The thousands who read his book and lost everything trying to replicate his success. The families destroyed by gambling addiction fueled by the illusion that the house could be beaten. The casino employees who lost their jobs when the industry restructured to protect against card counters. Ed Thorp proved that with enough intelligence, discipline, and mathematical precision, you could beat the system. But he also proved something darker. That when you show everyone the crack in the foundation, the people who built that foundation will make sure that the crack can never be exploited again. And they'll make the system even more predatory in the process. Was Ed Thorp a genius who democratized information and proved that intellect could overcome institutional advantage? Yes. Did he also unleash something that caused more harm than good? That gave false hope to people who couldn't possibly replicate his success? That made casinos more aggressive, more surveillance-heavy, more exploitative? Also, yes. Both things can be true. Ed Thorp didn't set out to hurt anyone. He was just curious, just solving problems, just following the math wherever it led. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions and brilliant ideas. The man who mathematically destroyed casinos also taught them how to become indestructible. He gave thousands of people hope that they could beat the house. And then the house made sure no one ever could again. That's the real dark side of gambling. Not the cheaters, not the addicts, not even the predatory casinos. It's the belief that if you're just smart enough, disciplined enough, mathematical enough, you can win. Because Ed Thorp did it. But Ed Thorp was 1 in a billion. And the rest of us? We're just the collateral damage of his genius.